Okay, so just in this lesson, I want to just recap on photosynthesis and respiration. So if we take what's called a biochemical process, so biochemical is something that living organisms do. So we have this word bio, and then we have this word chemical as well. So it's a biochemical process. A biochemical process is a series of chemical reactions in a living thing, so like photosynthesis and like respiration. So photosynthesis and respiration are what are known biochemical processes. Both photosynthesis and respiration involve energy. So in respiration, energy is released from food. In photosynthesis, energy is used to make food. So, and these two processes are kind of very much linked together. So they are between, for example, plants and animals. So what is respiration then? So respiration is the breakdown of food to release energy. So you have two types of respiration. You have aerobic respiration, which uses oxygen, and then you have anaerobic respiration, which does not use oxygen. Okay, so you have aerobic and then you have anaerobic. In aerobic respiration, so aerobic respiration is where the organism needs oxygen in order to be able to respire. So aerobic respiration, glucose and oxygen join together. So we breathe in oxygen, for example, and we take glucose in from our food to form carbon dioxide and water. And this process, the whole point of respiration is to release energy. So glucose and oxygen, so this is our formula then. So glucose plus oxygen will give us carbon dioxide, water and energy. And this process, it's a biochemical process. It takes place in all living cells, including most animals and plants. So if we take then and we kind of look into this in a bit more detail. So glucose is carried to the cells by our blood from our small intestine. So we eat food, for example, it's broken down by the body, and then in the small intestine, that glucose it is transferred from the small intestine to the blood. Oxygen is carried to our cells by the blood from the lungs. So when we breathe in, for example, oxygen passes over into our bloodstream. It binds onto the red blood cells, and it's brought then to the cells in our body. So what happens then is the energy is released. So in the cell, respiration happens. So energy is released and it's used by our cells. And a lot of the energy that's produced, it's lost from the cells as heat. So we use this glucose and the process of respiration, for example, to make energy to run the functions in our body. But we also use that energy to heat our body and keep ourselves warm. The waste products are, so the waste that's produced is carbon dioxide, which is carried by our blood from cells to the lungs. So that carbon dioxide that's produced after respiration goes back into the blood and then it's carried to our lungs. And when we breathe out the carbon dioxide. And the water is carried around our body by the blood as well. So again, excess water, we breathe out some water vapor when we breathe out, and the water then is carried around our body as well by the blood. So if we think about some of the factors that affect respiration, so respiration is affected by temperature, oxygen and water. So these are the factors, for example, that will impact on that chemical reaction taking place. So how does temperature affect the rate? So if we think about the rate of respiration, it's how quickly the chemical reaction happens. So we have a graph here that tells us the effect of temperature. So what it does, so if we think about this and we have a look, so as the temperature increases, initially the rate of the reaction increases up until a point, okay, and then you get to this maximum point. And then when the temperature gets higher, what happens is enzymes that are in the body that are important for the photosynthesis or for respiration to happen, they actually start to become denatured and they don't work properly. And as a result of that, the rate of respiration starts to rapidly then decline, like we can see here. So the temperature, what it does is it affects the speed at which the enzymes can work. So enzymes are chemicals which speed up reactions in living things. As the temperature increases, molecules move faster, so enzyme reactions speed up. So initially you get this increase in the rate of reaction because the temperature causes the molecules to speed up. But then above a certain temperature, enzymes change shape and do not work so well. So the enzyme reaction slows down. So when you get up here, when it gets too hot, because enzymes are made out of proteins, they become denatured, and as a result of that, they lose their shape and they stop functioning, and then that rapidly affects the rate of photosynthesis. We start to get a decline happening. So temperature affects the rate of photosynthesis, and the amount of oxygen also affects the rate of photosynthesis. So oxygen is needed for aerobic respiration. Humans and plants normally respire aerobically. So what does that mean? Humans and plants, they normally use oxygen in order to go through the process of respiration. Um, Oxygen is not needed for anaerobic respiration. So anaerobic means respiration without using oxygen. So humans respire anaerobically when we are short of breath, and in this case, lactic acid is produced, which causes cramps. And what's happening when you get a buildup of lactic acid? So basically, your body can't get enough oxygen in order to respire aerobically. So it starts to respire anaerobically, where it just takes the glucose, it breaks it down to produce energy to keep the body going. But in that process of anaerobic respiration, we get glucose being converted into lactic acid. Now, this process then of anaerobic respiration is used by yeast. So yeast respire anaerobically to form alcohol and carbon dioxide. And humans use this process to make alcoholic beverages, for example. And water is also needed to allow enzymes to work. And we can do some simple demonstrations as well to show like respiration happening. So if we take, like, we can set up a flask like so. So you have two thermos flasks. So that basically means that they keep the heat in. They don't let the heat in or out. So it kind of traps the heat. You have two thermometers. Okay, so the thermometers read temperature. And then what you have is you have like dead seeds, and then you have live seeds, and you put them into the thermos. You put in the thermometer so you can measure the temperature, and then you seal this up here on either side, um, so that it keeps the heat inside here within the flask. And what you want to do, so you're going to start off, they're going to be at the same temperature, and then what over time, then what you can do is you can monitor and see if there's any change in that temperature. So remember, because they're inside flasks, they're not being influenced by the temperature isn't being influenced by the outside temperature. So what's going to happen is the seeds in here are going to respire, and when they respire, they're going to produce heat. So just like when the cells in our body are respiring all the time, and that's what keeps our body warm. That's why when you touch your hands, for example, you know they feel warm. So what's happened? So the results of this then will be the flask with the live seeds should show a small rise in temperature. So again, these guys there'll be a small rise in temperature, and the flask with the dead seeds will not show any change in temperature over time. And that shows that the live seeds, when they respire, it increases temperature, or they produce heat, whereas the dead seeds are not respiring. So therefore there's no extra heat being produced, and therefore the temperature doesn't change. So you'll see a slight increase in the temperature with these guys here. Also, this is a simple demonstration as well. It basically shows, so if we take yeast, which is a living organism, and we put it in warm water, and then we give it food like sugar, what's going to happen is it's going to start to get the glucose from the sugar, and it's going to go through the process of respiration. So when it respires, what will happen is it will produce CO2. So that CO2 will be a gas, and that will want to get out of the bottle. And what's going to happen is it's going to go up here into the balloon. So the result is that the balloon covering the bottle with the sugar expands. So as respiration occurs down here, what happens is you get the balloon starts to expand, because you've all of this extra CO2 gas that's being produced. So the balloon covering the bottle with no sugar does not expand. So you could have something like this, and then you could set up a control where you just have warm water and yeast, but you don't give them any food, for example. So therefore, they're not able to respire, so they're not able to produce any of the CO2. So now if we look at the other biochemical reaction, so this is photosynthesis. So what is photosynthesis? So basically photosynthesis is the conversion of solar sunlight energy into chemical energy in the form of glucose. So that's basically what's happening. So it's kind of like the reverse of respiration. So plants make their own food by photosynthesis. That's the process. So this is the word equation for photosynthesis. So we use light energy, photosynthesis happens, and that light energy is converted into what's known as chemical energy. So you have this conversion of energy. So what are some of the factors affecting photosynthesis? The factors affecting photosynthesis are light. So for example, the amount of light, the photosynthesis needs light in order to happen. Water. So again, that's why you water your plants. So they need light and water in order for them to be able to photosynthesize and make their own food and produce oxygen as well in the meantime. Temperature is going to have a big impact. So the temperature of the room, for example, or the space that the plant is in, the amount of carbon dioxide in the air. So if you remember, plants absorb the carbon dioxide from the air, and then you have these. So photosynthesis happens in chlorophyll. So chlorophyll is like the green pigment that gives that green color to plants, but it's also very important in the process of photosynthesis. So if we look at the first factor that affects photosynthesis, if we think about the amount of light, for example, that's present. So light is produced by the sun. So plants get their light from the sun. It's trapped by the leaves, which is why they have large flat surfaces. So what happens is the sun beams down on the earth, for example, and the leaves trap the sunlight the plants trap their sunlight with their leaves. So that's why leaves are flat and they're kind of spread out so they can trap the light. And the source of energy, so this provides a source of energy to make photosynthesis, which the plants use to make their food and also produce oxygen. So what happens then is increase light intensity increases the rate of photosynthesis. So again, we have the same kind of a graph here. So we have light intensity. So as we increase the light intensity, we're going from left to right. What happens is the rate of photosynthesis increases as well. So you can see here, as the light increases, what's happening is the rate of photosynthesis is steadily increasing as well. And then it gets up to a point where it doesn't increase anymore, it just levels off. So you get this leveling off effect that's happening here. So above a certain light intensity, the rate of photosynthesis remains constant due to the plant not being able to get enough of a certain substance, such as carbon dioxide. So you can kind of think about it, the machinery in the plant, it can only handle so much carbon dioxide and so much light, and then it's at its full capacity. So you're not going to get, even if you increase the light intensity even some more, the rate of photosynthesis will not increase. So you get this type of a graph here. So light, again, is a factor that impacts photosynthesis. So the other thing then is carbon dioxide. So again, the plants need carbon dioxide in order to photosynthesize. So carbon dioxide is released into the air by respiration and burning fuels, for example. So when we breathe out carbon dioxide. So that's how it gets into the air. So when animals go through the process of respiration, they're releasing carbon dioxide into the air. And what happens then, it's taken in by plants from the air. So plants take this in and they use it to make glucose. So glucose is the food that the plant makes for itself and it's used. So plants are able to make their own food. So increasing the concentration of carbon dioxide increases the rate of photosynthesis. So again, we have this kind of similar type of diagram. So if we think about here along the bottom, we have the amount of this carbon dioxide that's being produced. So as we move from left to right, the concentration or the amount of carbon dioxide is increasing. And what we can see is as we increase the rate of carbon dioxide, we increase, should I say, the concentration of carbon dioxide, we increase the rate of photosynthesis. So how much photosynthesis is actually happening. So you can see here that there's a steady increase, and again you get to a point where we're not getting any more photosynthesis, extra photosynthesizing happening. So you get this leveling off effect here. So again, above a certain concentration of carbon dioxide, the rate of photosynthesis remains constant due to a shortage of another factor such as sunlight. So again, we get to a certain point and we can't get the rate of photosynthesis up any higher. And for example, people that grow plants, they sometimes burn paper, for example, and they produce CO2 and they increase the concentrations of CO2, for example, in their greenhouse. And what that does is it feeds the plant, or it gives the plants the raw materials that they need in order to make photosynthesis, and it actually can help increase the rate of photosynthesis. So again, carbon dioxide is one of those factors that impacts on the rate of photosynthesis. So then just some of the other factors that affect photosynthesis. So water. Water is absorbed by the roots from the soil. It's transported up the stem of the leaf and it's used to make glucose and to allow enzymes to work. So this is another factor that will affect photosynthesis. This is why we water our plants, so that plants can photosynthesize and make their own food. Chlorophyll. So again, chlorophyll, what is that? It's a green dye or pigment that's in plants. That's why they're green. It's made by the plants and it's a catalyst for photosynthesis. So a catalyst means that it speeds up the reaction but is not used up by the reaction. So for example, a catalyst, it helps the process of photosynthesis, but it's not being depleted through the process of photosynthesis. And again, this chlorophyll is essential for photosynthesis. And then the other factor then is temperature. So temperature affects the rate of enzyme controlled reactions. So again, we've seen that when it gets too hot, these enzymes start to bend out of shape and they stop working. And it affects the rate of photosynthesis. For example, as it is an enzyme, it controls the reaction. So enzymes are proteins, for example, that can control chemical reactions or biochemical reactions such as photosynthesis. So these are some of the main factors that, along with the amount of CO2, that affect photosynthesis happening. So then finally, if we think like what are the products of photosynthesis, the products of photosynthesis are glucose, which is used, so the whole point in the plant going through having this process of photosynthesis is to produce glucose, which is used, the plant uses that to provide energy in respiration. So the plant then makes its own food and then it breaks down its own food through the process of respiration. To form starch, which is stored in the plants. So again, this glucose is converted into starch and it's stored in the plants, and to form new cells to allow plants to grow. So again, this glucose is used by the plant in order to repair itself and to grow new cells. So oxygen, so what's oxygen used for? So oxygen is used for aerobic respiration by the plants. So it produces glucose and oxygen, and it releases some of the oxygen, but it uses some of the oxygen then in the process of respiration. And it's released out of the leaves and can then be used for aerobic respiration by other living things then as well. Okay, so plants are very important for that. They keep the balance of oxygen in the air. Okay, so that's just a summary of the photosynthesis and respiration chapter. So hopefully you find that useful. Okay, thank you.